We've got the official second weekend box office numbers for Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, and they give us a good indication of what the final take for the film might be. I wanted to break down these numbers, talk about the different narratives going on online about these numbers, and give you my take on what it all means. What's up, everybody? It's Josh. Welcome back to the channel, and happy Monday to you. Hope you're still enjoying your holiday season, whatever it is. But if you could do me a favor, chomp like. Yeah, that's right. We're still chopping like. We might change it in early 2020, but if you could do that, it would help us out. So this probably won't come as a surprise to you, but despite everybody getting the same numbers, if you go to look online about what is going on with the Rise of Skywalker box office, you will hear a bunch of different takes. Thus is the way of Star Wars commentary right now, and thus is just the way of the internet. But I wanted to just talk about the numbers and then kind of try to more objectively give you what it all really means. So the 3-day weekend number is $72 million. But it is worth mentioning that the Wednesday to Sunday number is actually $134.7 million. Now, as we talked about a little bit throughout the week, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker had an incredible week, really bringing in a ton of money on weekdays during this holiday break for people. So this really sort of turned the narrative around for most people, and it did have a very good week and then had a $72 million weekend, which is a 59% drop-off from the first weekend. Now, this 59% drop-off is much less than the 67.5% drop-off that The Last Jedi had between its first and second weekend, but it's still not that great. I mean, The Force Awakens held strong with like a 40% drop-off, and really, if we could have gotten towards a 50 or a 40% drop-off, you could have been looking at a box office that could have even beaten The Last Jedi. Now, as it stands right now, the film is about $6 million behind the tracking of The Last Jedi, and if we follow those numbers out, it really does look like this movie will come in a little bit below what The Last Jedi did, somewhere in the 1.1, 1.2 range. But just to give you sort of an example of how different people are taking angles on this, Scott Mendelson over at Forbes wrote an article about a massive plunge that the film had Friday to Friday, and he talked about how Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker was going to join the $100 million loss club. Basically saying that the film was literally losing more than $100 million from its week 1 to week 2 drop-off. But it's worth mentioning that Scott Mendelson thinks that The Last Jedi is better than Empire Strikes Back, and he actually ranks it number 1 in all of his Star Wars movies, and he actually ranks Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker as the lowest film in Star Wars history. Bias much, Scott? But I wanted to conversely highlight what Cinema Blend talked about in their coverage of the box office weekend, where they did show a bunch of other films that have also had a $100 million loss, or joined the $100 million loser club, as Scott Mendelson would call it. Now, I'm putting up the graphic from Cinema Blend right here, but of course you have Avengers Endgame, The Last Jedi, you have Infinity War, Lion King, Age of Ultron, Civil War, The Avengers, Incredibles 2, Jurassic World, and Iron Man 3. So this shows that the film is actually in very good company when it comes to making money, but it also just shows the disparity between narratives when it comes to what is going on with the box office. Now, there is one more week of holiday season box office where a lot of people will be out of school and some people won't even be working, so they will bolster the numbers pretty significantly next week, which probably makes it a safe bet that the film will at least hit $1 billion, which at the time of its first weekend was looking a little bit shaky. I mean, the $175 million that it took opening weekend was very low, even compared to modest projections. And unless there's some really crazy legs going into January, this means it probably will not catch Star Wars The Last Jedi. Now, before I get into all of what I think this means and how I think Disney should respond, let's talk about really the worst part of this whole story, and this has to do with the box office in China. Star Wars Episode 9 has flopped magnificently in China, almost to a hilarious degree. And if you look at the trends of the movies from the Disney era of Star Wars, you can see a very negative trend with how the Chinese market is responding to these movies. The Force Awakens took in $126 million over in China. Rogue One took in 69. The Last Jedi took in only 43. And right now, The Rise of Skywalker hasn't even hit 20 million and will likely not pass 25 million total in the Chinese market. Now, I know some people don't think the Chinese box office matters at all, and when you open up that can of worms about China and what's going on in China over there right now, and how we should all feel about it. It's a kind of a ridiculous conversation to get into, but without going too far into it, I think it's just clearly a marker that this brand is majority being rejected by a massive market. However you want to feel about it, the Chinese market is a huge place that a lot of MCU movies make a ton of money from. Sometimes 30 to 40% of their total gross can come from China. And so it's a really interesting tale here. What's going on exactly? I think at the very least, it's just a sign that this brand is trending downward, and in certain places around the world, it's trending downward very aggressively. So what does all of this mean? Well, depending on who you're talking to, it's either like the sky is falling or there's really nothing wrong and this is just what is going on with this brand. I think that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the gray, hashtag the gray order. But I think if we're calling a spade, this is a downward trend. Like there's no way around it. It is very likely that The Rise of Skywalker will make the lowest amount of money of the whole trilogy in the box office. So that's not a good sign, and it breaks the trend of Star Wars past, where you have the number 1 film coming in, then it dips in number 2, and then it comes back up in number 3, really rallying quite strongly. And it's frankly just a downward trend. Now, this is far from a flop. This is very much a different conversation than what was going on with Solo, which was just really rejected by a lot of people and poorly marketed. And, not to go down that rabbit hole, but Solo was a unique case of disaster when it came to Star Wars, which, by the way, I'm not absolving Lucasfilm of. That was horrible, and, that deserves some consequences. But when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker, we've shown that at least for the saga films, the brand is still really strong. I mean, we're literally talking about billion-dollar movies, and we're trying to sort of paint them as a failure or look at it in a negative light. So the bottom line is Star Wars is still a really strong brand, and whatever happens next, the film in 2022, a lot of people will turn out for that film, and if it's marketed correctly, if there's some changes that goes on at Lucasfilm and Disney, I mean, you could potentially see another bubble kind of come up, something akin to what happened with The Force Awakens, probably not as big, but like the brand itself is not dead. So people that are telling you that Disney killed Star Wars, absolutely incorrect. But there were a group of people out there that were very vocal about the fact that anybody talking about how Star Wars was in trouble or there were negative things happening with Star Wars were haters and were wrong. I experienced this a lot. Every time I tried to objectively point to things that were going on with Star Wars that were not good and try to point out that, yes, there's some really loud people over here being buttholes about all of this, but they're not wrong about everything, that caused a lot of from people online. And if you were one of those people that were in denial that anything bad was going on with Star Wars, I hope that this has absolved you of that denial, because it's pretty undeniable that Star Wars as a brand is on a downward trend. And I think the real issue here, and where I kind of get the most angry about this whole situation, is that when you juxtapose how this all started with where we have landed now, it's really kind of sad. I mean, in 2015 and 2016, Star Wars was not only back, but the biggest thing in pop culture. It was literally the biggest movie of all time, the biggest domestic take ever. You'd go into Target or Walmart and there would just be Star Wars everywhere. Everybody was talking about it. It was a beautiful time to be a fan, and everybody thought, wow, this is crazy. Here we go. Star Wars is going to reach this whole new level. And quite frankly, Disney made a lot of mistakes, fumbled quite a bit, made The Last Jedi, which I know a lot of people like, and including me, I like that movie. But for the brand, I don't think you can objectively look at it and say that was a good idea. The things that Ryan did in that film and the way that Disney responded to the controversy afterwards was laughably bad, really, really bad, and it did hurt the brand. I mean, frankly, we're just a far way away from 2015, 2016 Star Wars, and as a fan, I want us to get back to that place. I would like Star Wars to be the biggest, bestest thing out there, and for Star Wars fans to feel good about that, as opposed to what has been going on lately, which has been horrible. Being a Star Wars fan leading up to The Rise of Skywalker was a very bad experience. It wasn't pleasant. It was very different than being a Marvel fan going into Endgame. I mean, those were two big movies that I covered last year or this year in 2019, and man, how different those were is pretty crazy. So without, being too hyperbolic, I think that things definitely need to change. And to be fair, Disney is not dumb. They know what's going on and they're making changes. I mean, just just look at the Rise of Skywalker. They would not have made that film the way they made it unless they saw in the numbers, saw in the analytics of social media, and just saw overall that The Last Jedi and the choices made in that film had turned off a lot of people. And not just angry, loud people on YouTube, but just normal people that just didn't like it. And so you can clearly see that there was a lot of effort made to put Star Wars back the way it was before and try to bring more fans back to it. They also wouldn't be taking a hiatus, which is very rare for Disney actually to take a break in big franchises that are making billions of dollars. But the fact that they did decide to take this break is a clear indication that they know things are not going the right way. They needed to pause, recalibrate, make some changes, and then get people excited about what comes next. I mean, Bob Iger said on the red carpet for the premiere that whatever they do next, the next Star Wars movie, is very, very important. He also sort of downplayed Kathy's comments about not doing trilogies in the future, which is really interesting. And we're said to be getting a new announcement in January about who the director will be for the 2022 movie. But my bottom line take is like, yes, Disney did get out of this thing alive. They didn't destroy Star Wars, and the movie will probably still make $1 billion, which is great, but they have to know big changes have to be made. I do think Kathy needs to just step down either now or when her contract is up, and I do think they need to bring John Favreau in to be sort of the new president of Lucasfilm and set us up for the future. And we need to do something really cool with this next movie and either go back and tell Old Republic stuff or go way into the future and set up a new thing, man. So whatever they do, they really do need to sort of just completely change the direction. I would clean house with a lot of the creative people that were involved in the sequel trilogy. You can do it in a Disney way that doesn't disrespect these people, but by and large, you have to move them out, move new people in to get fresh blood and to get people excited about the possibilities of what comes next. I think Favreau, Dave Filoni, and George Lucas need to be involved in what the vision is for the future of Star Wars. I think they still need to do a trilogy, which is what they're probably going to do because they have 3 films slated. So I think they do trilogy, get Deborah Chow to direct the first one, have George, Dave, and John decide on what the future of Star Wars looks like, move them into big positions, move Kathy out of her position, and then I think you have almost a complete turnaround, or at least the chance to bring a lot of fans back. But those are my thoughts on the box office and what it means and what Disney should do next, but those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you think about all of this, so please let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section below. And now let's shout out Norma McPhee. Indeed, the last words spoken by Anakin Skywalker were, "Tell your sister you were right." So shout out to you, Norma. And now let's ask another nerd card question. I want to know, what is the last line spoken by Rey in Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker? Answer that question in the comment section below. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.